Welcome to End of Life University on YouTube. Today, I'm sharing a conversation I had with Ned Buskirk, who is the CEO and creative inspiration behind You're Going to Die. And it's a movement with a strong presence on social media. I think you're going to really love listening to our conversation, a really heartfelt conversation that we had together. So if you haven't already, be sure to subscribe to this channel. Also, subscribe and leave a rating and review for the podcast wherever you happen to listen. And if you'd like to know ways you can provide a tiny bit of financial support, go to eoluniversity.com/support, and you'll see 3 different ways you can make a small contribution that will help keep us on the air. So thanks again for tuning in, and here we go with my conversation with Ned. Today, I'm very happy to welcome my guest, Ned Buskirk, who is the founder, podcast host, facilitator, and executive director for Youre Going to Die, or YG2D, as it's known on the internet and social media. A 501c3 nonprofit bringing diverse communities creatively into the conversation of death and dying, inspiring life by unabashedly sourcing our shared mortality. And you can learn more at the website YG2, the number 2, YG2D.com. So, Ned, thank you so much for joining me. I'm really excited to talk to you today.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. It means a lot to have conversations like this about stuff I care about so much.
Yeah, I've been following you on Instagram. That's primarily where I got familiar with You're Going to Die, and I love the posts that you put there. I don't know if it's only you doing that or you have a team that works on it.
Mostly me, but yeah, there's some other people over here doing some of that stuff.
Yeah, but I just feel really inspired by the types of things that you post because you have humor, sometimes a little dark humor in what you post, and lots
Yeah.
of creativity. And I think your voice is really important right now in this space. And so I'm happy that you're here and happy that I get to talk to you about that.
Thanks so much. It means, like I said, a lot to kind of live in this and in some ways maybe be kind of alone in it. Let's just use the social media as a reference. There's so much of that story and all the years of using platforms like Instagram to kind of process and provide access points to what we do and keep a conversation going that I care about and explore, figure it out, because I certainly don't have all the answers and really many of the answers. And so it matters to get chances like this with people I haven't had the pleasure of talking with yet, to be connected in it a bit. You know, social media is certainly so powerfully important for connecting community and like I said, being in dialogue about these things. But there's nothing like just connecting one-on-one or, you know, with intimate community with this stuff. So thank you for having me on your show.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I've been really interested just looking at your website in how diverse the offerings are that you have through You're Going to Die. And so I can tell like you've kind of created it organically, I would say, as things have arisen or opportunities have come up or you've recognized a need. So I'm really excited to be able to share with the audience what You're Going to Die is and some of the things that you offer if you wanted to just dive in wherever you feel comfortable.
Sure. Yeah, thanks. I mean, I love to focus on how you described it, which I don't know that everybody would pick up on, or maybe it's considered a matter of fact part of what we do. But there is a way that I feel very strongly about this paying attention for what's needed next. And really, that's how You're Going to Die started. It's like I wasn't getting something in my life that I needed. And the very beginning of this story, at least as far as the organization goes, is with our open mic. And it's called You're Going to Die Poetry, Prose, and Everything Goes. And the first one that I did, or maybe like the original iteration of it was in 2009. But by 2012, when my mother-in-law died, and her death really brought up a lot of the heartbreak and grief and that old experience of my mother's death in 2003, doing the open mic the first time after my mother-in-law's death really made it clear for me what I needed that space for. And it was, like I often say, a place to talk about my mom and my mother-in-law and their lives and their deaths, and to tell the stories and tell the details and grieve publicly with community that by then I really felt like could hold it, because this inclination of the space is to name those things. I think already, it having been called You're Going to Die for a while, it really created this tender container of holding for our precious little fragile beings and the unique ways each of us express ourselves. And so really from that event on, this understanding for our organization to pay attention for the next thing that's needed has felt really important. And I'd say this mortality conversation has both an urgency to it. So then this moment of, oh my goodness, this is what needs to be done and it needs to be done now. And this, well, nothing really matters. Everything's meaningless. We're all going to die eventually. So then this maybe spaciousness to not feel like, well, the next thing that needs to happen is the next sellout occurrence or the next big social media push or the next whatever, this culture of success and driving forward to accomplish the next big thing. Being in this mortality conversation also has kind of made room for us. And so I think out of that is with that spaciousness, then clearly the next thing is a workshop that's getting community together to make meaning out of mortality after 3 years of pandemic, where things have been so dark, and we're clearly so good at making room for grief with the spaces we offer. Well, what does it mean to ask community to work a little more on the meaning out of these hard parts of life? So much of what we produce as far as events and workshops, open mics and concerts, and our programming really is the paying attention. This is what's next. It's undeniable. And I can't stop thinking about it. And what other better measurement for what we need to do in life than that kind of attention?
I really like that you brought up the paradox of, on the one hand, the urgency of let's get this message out right now. And
Yeah.
then on the other hand, stopping and saying, wait a minute. It's and you've emphasized this, I've read in your writings, not to take things too seriously. So we respond to the urgency, we're doing our work, we're doing whatever we can to make changes, but at the same time, not get too serious about it, because we only have this moment and we got to be making the most of our joy in life too.
Sure. Yeah. I think that original invitation for the open mic was the idea that if you could die tomorrow, since tomorrow is no promise, then what do you have to share with us now? And in that invitation is both the share that thing, because this is our only chance to get you, and to receive your poem or your song or your story. And simultaneously this let it go, don't take yourself so seriously that you just hold on to this stuff, and for fear maybe of being seen and figured out and judged, that the invitation works in both directions to open us to the moment that we have together and how fleeting it is. So take the risk, because it'll matter. I think maybe 99.9% of the time, us taking that risk will matter to someone else. And like I say all the time, I don't know about what we do being more other, does death feel better? Does it make death easier? I don't know about that. I think there's times when I feel like it does for me personally. Maybe after all these years, somehow my relationship to death is easier. But more importantly than that, I think what we offer is that place to connect to one another, to remember you're not alone. and feel seen and heard. That just feels so important, maybe now more than ever in our times that we're living in.
Yeah, for sure. And I was reading a study that shows that our brains are actually wired to deny our own death. That in the study they found that the brain just shuts down, like it does not compute when they conflate death with your own image. And so that means we have to retrain our brains to accept the fact that we're mortal. And I like first of all that you named your organization You're Going to Die, because you keep putting the message out there, and like our brains need to just hear that over and over again in order to begin to accept it and for it to sink in. And then I also think these creative spaces where people share their poetry and prose and music, that's kind of a gentle entry point in some ways for someone who still hasn't accepted their mortality, but to sit and listen to people, creative people who have, I think that's a nice way to inspire people who are trying to teach their brains to accept death.
Yeah. I think our creative, let's put it this way. I think the creative parts of who we are inclined towards engaging with this stuff, maybe more often than some other like parts of our humanity. And so then especially our artists, our musicians and our writers and our poets, their skill at confronting or expressing these parts of life, these truths, it's such valuable medicine. And that's not to say there aren't musicians and artists out there that are really skillful at their craft and maybe not engaging with that stuff as much. I actually think that's a very real part of what it means to be an artist sometimes. But I think the inclination to our spaces for having that kind of presence, and so then that kind of encouragement for others to open, and maybe like with music especially, it really runs through everything we do. The softening that comes from a song that really meets us there. Why so many people on the podcast are artists, on our podcast, You're Going to Die, the podcast, are musicians and writers and poets and even comedians, and knowing that what they offer us in their work is medicine for our mortality. I really believe in that. And also, I'd say, especially with our spaces now, let's say the open mic, back when we first started, it really was maybe a hub, one of them for a lot of artists in San Francisco. And this might be a way of expressing why it works in the way you're acknowledging. Over time, over the years, more than ever, the people that get up on stage are maybe not that specific demographic. They're a little more of your general community who want a space to tell the story and maybe read a poem and maybe try to sing a song. But they're people that are accessing that part of who they are and willing to share it in a way that's most powerful for me, because it's not the skilled, perfect song that sounds so good or that really well written poem. It's someone who's just taking a chance, and that creative expression, the spontaneous moment of opening vulnerably to others despite the risks. There's nothing more inspiring to me than that moment. And what a healing occurrence to give up ourselves like that as an offering to one another. And you see it at these events, the slow opening of many, many doors as people start to say, oh, that's possible. I want to do that too. And how much comes from community doing that together. It's still, after over 10 years of creating that kind of space, it's still offering me personally why I started in the first place, which is some kind of healing in that togetherness and witnessing.
Mm. I love that tapping into the creative side of our consciousness. It's really what all of us need to do. And as you said, we don't have to be professional artists, well practiced. Each one of us has that ability to be creative. And when we're looking for ways to understand our mortality and to live with it, it's our own creativity that we need. That's the tool that we need to help us in that process.
Yeah, I really believe that. And not being an art therapist or a mental health professional, I do a lot of work with our organization, especially in the cancer patient community, in, I guess, under the umbrella of what people would call art therapy. But I'll just speak to it sort of non-professionally, since again, I don't have the certificate behind me to declare, well, I studied 18 years of what it means to write and get healing from that process. But what I do know after 5 or 10 years of holding that kind of space with workshops and individual one-on-one work creatively is that I believe that, let's keep it with writing for now, because it is so often one of the elements we do in our workshops. And just to kind of clarify the connection, like for now, next Tuesday, we have a meaning out of mortality workshop, and it's a writing workshop, and there's music because Chelsea Coleman, our creative director, is a musician, and she's very often the musician who helps kind of hold that space, and not as a performer, but more as a, like I described, music as a way to catch us after we've opened a lot, or music as a way to soften us, to open us more. But writing workshops like that one, I really believe that we, in that act, access parts of us, ourselves, even our unconscious, that are where we're digging up so much of the things, to go back to what you said about that study, that we've buried. And in truth, that, that's no judgment on anyone, really. We all do it, and I do it. This act of needing to bury things to get through life, because not just life in general, but the systems we live in, let's say capitalism, for example, these systems really keep us needing to not think about that stuff. Because how hard would it be to get through a workday if we were confronted by our own mortality so intensely? And so workshops and events like we offer, and so many of the people I respect out there in the death and dying community creating those kinds of spaces, feel like a needed excavation of those darker buried parts of who we are, and in places where they can be held. I've been thinking lately, so often I'm thinking, gosh, I want to talk about my mom who died in 2003. So I created a space to do that. My belief is not that we should just be talking about these things everywhere. I don't really feel that way. As confronting as our organization is with its name, I understand when it's too much for people, even just in that title, You're Going to Die. And so I believe we need the places to go where we feel like we're safe enough to be vulnerable. Like that kind of context I needed more of. And I needed a place to express, let's say, the grief and the story of my mom's life and death, because I needed it enough to do the rest of life maybe a little more intentionally, or with clarity, or with presence of being, or with having had that catharsis more regularly. Granted, I'm a executive director for a nonprofit that it called You're Going to Die, a creatively conscious mortality nonprofit. So maybe I'm like talking about it an awful lot more than your average individual, but just to bring it to that personal experience, the need for just finding enough places, more than we have, but enough places to go where it's like, I know I have this. Like, for example, Wednesdays at 5 p.m., we're having these grief releases on Zoom. And it's every Wednesday. It's just for an hour. It's not very structured, but it's just a place to come and say, through the year, we committed to doing it every Wednesday all year. This is a place where I can keep returning. This is a place where I can say that thing that I'm carrying in my heart all day long, all week long, and I'm not talking about enough, but I know I have that space. And I feel this way, but I hear people say, when I don't come, I can feel it. Like it matters that I didn't get that. We know we can't talk about these things at work all day long. So thank goodness there's places we can go and be with others who can hold it, because not everybody can, you know?
Yeah, and I could imagine even coming even on a day when you weren't ready to, to tell your own story, but to listen to other people and to help hold their stories can also be so
Oh
healing for
yeah,
us.
I agree. Yeah, I feel like almost, as importantly, maybe even a little more importantly, the listening that happens in these spaces is a form of healing. I totally agree with that. It is that for me.
Yeah, yeah. Because you get to hear a lot of people's stories through the open mics and in the workshops and even on your podcast, which I do that as well.
Hmm.
I get to hear lots of stories, and it's amazing how it's healing, but it's this feeling of so much connectedness with other people, and how ultimately we are all asking the same kinds of questions. We're all struggling with the same issues of trying to find meaning just in what life brings to us.
Yeah. Yeah, I think in our culture, I'm going to try out a line of conversation for us that's compelling me right now. And I'm not saying I have this figured out, but it's something that's come up for me this week, even like in the last 48 hours. But something I think about my mom's death at that young age, I was just 26, is that I got a rite of passage that we don't have built into our culture. And boy, I wish I didn't have to go through that. But I do think it's something like that my mom's death offered me. And there are so many cultures that have these rites of passage built into them, but I really don't think we have easy access to that. And so sometimes I think what these spaces offer is some version of that, even if it is like a more basic ritual. I'm going to go to a grief release every week, and the kinds of things people are going to offer me from the stories of their lives, maybe even offering me their own rites of passage. There's a way that we get that, we integrate it. And there is no time I show up in these groups and the workshops I facilitate or the events I go to, and I say, oh, I get it. I absolutely lived through that exact thing. Say someone's mother died, even. I can say, I understand from my story, but listening to you share your story of your mother's death is a learning for me. And so I think about some of these spaces as a chance for us to ritually, ceremonially, sacredly, regularly, though, consistently be in other people's rites of passage. And so then when I leave every time, I have a deepening of my understanding of what it means to be alive. And like you said, what it means to be with these challenges and traumas and heartbreak and crises and still choose life.
And I really think you mentioned just having gone through the pandemic. I think it's pushed a lot of people to have to look at mortality and to also just experience personally losses and confusion about what the hell, why is this happening? What's going on? What's life
Mm,
about? And so it feels like
yeah.
we have a lot of pent up need in some ways for the very spaces that you're creating. Like we could really use them everywhere in every community, because I'm imagining people are out there wishing they could talk about it and wishing they could had a way to connect with others, but we don't have channels for that in our everyday society.
Well, I think that I totally agree. And I think that they're there, but I think that it takes something to get to them. And I also think we're not trained and practiced enough to know what it means to be in those contexts. I think there are people who, like I said, understandably show up to an open mic and it's too much, quote unquote, for them. And I believe that that's real. And like maybe even they either can't come because it's too much and they know it already, or they leave and never come back because it's too much. And so I think I'm trying to say, like, yes, I agree with you. And I know these spaces are out there. I know these workshops are out there. And I know it more maybe than the average person because I work in that kind of community, and I'm connected to organizations who are offering these spaces, and they are available in ways that aren't, financially restrictive, like there are places to go. But I do think it takes something to seek them out and find the right match, to know that you're I think there's people that would come to our organization and do one of our events and it wouldn't align with them as well as maybe it would be to go to the Order of the Good Death, or Going with Grace, or working with someone like Claire Bidwell Smith, or, the list and list and list of on and on and ons. Like, it takes something to go and find the right community who knows how to hold the way you're in the world. And I think it takes the leaning in to, this is hard. It's not easy to be in these conversations. It's not easy to go to these open mics where people are crying on stage, talking about like their bleeding, dying, gasping loved ones' last moments of life. That's hard to be with. But I believe in, after 10 years, more than ever, the effort needed, that it's worthwhile. And that there's a way, I believe, my death anxiety might be subdued a little bit. My relationship to my own inevitable demise eased from choosing to be with my own death in community with others. I think it's worthwhile. And I still am like, oh, I understand if you don't want to go, or I don't want to go. It's not uncommon for me to think, even talking with you today, like, oh, do I really have to talk about all this stuff today? I'm not going to lie and say that I didn't have that feeling after a big week of doing it a lot already. But I can tell you, even just to keep it connected to our conversation, how it feels worthwhile now, how 100% of the time, maybe it does.
Yeah. Yeah. I understand that exactly, because I mean, I think we need spaces where we can delve into our denial for a while too. That's part of living too. We need spaces where we aren't constantly thinking about our mortality,
Absolutely.
because that's where we remind ourselves how precious life is, and that we want to get the joy from it that we can.
Yeah. Yeah. I agree with that. I wonder what I have to do after this call is I have to start therapy. And I'm naming that because I believe in it. And there's times in my life, including when my mother died, when I first got into a bereavement group and met the first therapist that I would work with, how powerfully important that was for me. And the right therapist is like a guide and a mentor. But I'm telling you now that's why I have to hurry off after this call to be in that, my first session with a new therapist. And the reason why I'm saying that is because I know I have questions around the health and balance and boundaries needed for me doing this work as regularly as I do. And so I'm trying to highlight what you just shared, which is I completely need a place where I can go and certainly be held and taken care of and get some attention from someone after all the attention I've given others, but also as a way of maybe reconnecting to more of, okay, I'm also in life. I am taking care of 2 kids, raising kids. I'm in a relationship. I need to go to a theme park this weekend with them and have a fun time and not be buried under a bunch of other people and my own grief that I excavated all week. So I totally agree. How do we stay in life and not be with these truths and get so overwhelmed that we're broken by it and heavier because of it? My hope is when people come to the things we offer, that they'll at a minimum feel the same as when they showed up. My fear is they'll leave feeling heavier,
Hmm.
because I think that can happen. My hope is that they leave feeling lighter and more connected and less alone than ever before and more alive, than ever before. I want that. And I feel like I've done this long enough that I get that every time. But I think it takes practice. And I think it takes, like you said, good work at also enjoying and celebrating life and being in like these things that seem silly and meaningless and kind of like, really, you're going to do that this weekend in the state of the world that it is, with the amount of grief there is? You're going to go to a theme park, but we need to have fun. And I just want to admit, this conversation, there's been a little bit of laughs coming out of me, but it's been heavy today for me. And so I feel very subdued. And I'm kind of naming that to say that, bring it back to something you said about You're Going to Die, that there's an effort I feel more than ever, but also that's run through the history of our work, and maybe let's say the social media as the example you brought up. Like, we need to laugh about these things. I want to more. I want to have fun. We've been even thinking about having the open mic. Usually it's an open mic with a musician who plays songs peppered throughout the night, like a feature. And we're considering featuring stand-up comics, at these events, so that there's plenty of room for crying. And then there's a definitive moment when a professional gets up and says, okay, let's laugh a bit. And I'm your like skilled laughter professional who's going to get us there. And the events do that on their own, but thinking, do we need to do maybe even more intentional work around, oh, we need to laugh hard. Like after my mom died, how deeply I cried and how much I could laugh after that catharsis, the bringing us back up, the buoy after the like release.
Oh yeah, I can relate to everything you're saying, having worked in hospice for so many years,
Right.
and the fact of when you're attending other people's deaths and being part of one crisis after another for the people that you're trying
Oh
to
my
help
goodness. Yeah.
all day long, that it really is important to figure out how to have boundaries. And I was in the same position, raising two kids, and figuring out, oh, I have to also be a wife and mother, and
And come home.
I
Yeah.
can't bring this home. I have to
Right.
find a way. And it was funny because my kids knew what I did. They knew what my work was about. And one day when my
How old were they?
they were
I
like,
know probably many years of you doing
yeah,
this,
it
but
was many years ago, but yeah, they were, oh, let's say if this was a time when they were about 7 and 9,
mm-hmm.
and my son had a friend over, and I just got a call that one of my hospice patients had died. And so I made some remark that, oh, I'm going to have to go now, because a patient died. So my son's friend said, your mom's patient died? And my son
Yeah.
said, yeah, all of her patients die. And his friend said, I'm never going to her as a doctor. And I had
Oh.
such a good laugh about that in a way, because of like the innocence of the children. For my
Mm.
kids, it was just matter of fact, like, oh well, yeah, everyone she takes care of ends up
Mm.
dying. But that's actually true for every doctor. I mean,
That's
everyone
right.
dies
That's
eventually.
right. That's right. In fact, everybody that works with anybody, all of the people they work with die
They all
eventually.
die.
But I know,
Everyone does.
I
But
understand the uniqueness of your work as a hospice nurse practitioner. Yeah, wow. So do you still do that now?
I'm not working clinically anymore. So
Mm-hmm.
I left clinical practice to focus more on teaching and
Oh yeah.
the podcast and writing books and things, because
Mm-hmm.
I felt like I wanted a way to reach a bigger audience and
Mm-hmm.
to have a bigger community to try to put information out
Yeah.
around end of life issues.
Thank you for doing that work. Yeah, hospice is a unique beginning of my kind of, I guess the way I'd put it is I really wanted to, I'd say like legitimize the role I had at these open mics back in like the early 2010s. And so I started volunteering because my mom didn't have hospice, but my mother-in-law had hospice. And I was like, what the heck? What is this? This is transformative. And what a huge difference between those deaths because of that element. And I didn't want to go to school, and I wasn't planning on becoming a nurse or even a chaplain or anything like that, but I started volunteering. And so I just want to acknowledge what it was like, how important it was for me to do that. during those early years of figuring out, well, how am I in this conversation if I'm not a professional working in death and dying? And that access point for me was so significant, to be with people, some of them for, like, better than I, how long people live on hospice, but to be in those long conversations, those long relationships, and then the loss was huge, and also got me present to how big a deal that would be to have as a 9 to 5, or a job all the time. And so then, too, understanding how much you put into that, and to reach a point in your life where you need to shift too. It's
Mhm.
like, you've done it. And now what is that offering through the other work possible, like with your writing and the podcast and teaching? And so anyway, this is a way of acknowledging, in the little ways I understand the hospice context. Thank you for that journey. And boy, how many thousands of people, needed you.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, I mean, it changed everything in my life for
mm,
me in terms of
oh,
just figuring
sure.
out I need to be in the present moment, and
Mm-hmm.
I've got to be enjoying every moment and recognizing what you've talked about, just like the fleeting nature of life, the
Mm-hmm.
preciousness of it all. And that being in that space really helped me like carry my grief with me, but in the midst of living a full life and
Yeah.
finding joy and seeing the light and being filled with love, still holding the grief the entire time, but
Mm,
figuring out how to keep those things in balance.
mm-hmm. Yeah, boy, what an endeavor. I feel like I have so much more to learn about that. I think
Yeah.
it's so hard to hold that balance.
Yeah, it definitely is. And you have the added responsibilities of being an administrator in a way over a nonprofit, which brings in all kinds of other
Oh my gosh.
stressors and issues at the same time, I'm sure.
You could not have acknowledged me for that at a better time. This week definitely felt that way. It's something, I'm sure you get it. Well, I'll just explain it from my perspective, that it is so wild to hold space, let's say in a day, for cancer patient community, and be sensitive and open. And no part of my job is to, like, be empathetic and really draw forth by being a raw, vulnerable, open nerve, like that heart, that open heartedness. And then to leave that and go into San Quentin, which I do every week, doing work with community inside around suicide prevention. And then to have, like, a business call after that, or get on a call to talk about sponsorship for podcasts, or logistics around event scheduling, and really realizing, especially after talking to a dear friend yesterday, that there might need to be, again, the learning, right? This intentional separation, even daily, well, today I do a lot of, I'm open, raw, and holding space, and tomorrow I'm going to put on the other hat. And so thanks for bringing that up. It's very real for me this week, that experience. And it's a chance to say, gosh, I'm learning. And especially learning, being someone who doesn't have the sort of normal pathway to some of the work that I do, that most people, it's like, how did I end up doing all these things if I didn't start with, like, going to school to become a hospice nurse? And so the learning is constant, and the self-care and the boundaries, it's constant figuring out, like, how do I do a better job at that? And I think it's worth talking about this. I don't have much more to say, but I think hopefully it's worthwhile for the listeners to get another version of, well, how do we lean into some of this and keep taking care of ourselves in ways that can keep us productive, and like you said, maybe even still living joyfully and alive, and not buried under our attempts to uncover the grief, or the sorrow, or the heartbreak, or the wounds that we have from being alive. um it's just a encouragement, hopefully, for the listeners to know it's a process, it's a learning. Be open to that. And I think maybe with the hospice connection, someone said recently that their teachers told them, beginner's mind, you know, in this life, to always be open to learning and paying attention from ourselves and
Mhm.
from others, and not getting stuck in the I have it all figured out. Because guess what's going to happen when you think you have it figured out? I mean,
Exactly.
in your work.
It will be shown to you that you do not have it figured out.
Yeah. Yeah, everything is inherently out of control, out of our control.
Well, in this field, there is, as I mentioned before, so much pent up need, like the need around us for people to talk about their grief, to be supported in these crisis times of life and through their losses and their struggles. It's huge. And so energetically, I feel like when we show up and we're willing to help and make a difference, the need pulls at us constantly. We feel it. And so it is very hard to sometimes say no. I need a different space for myself. I can't necessarily do all the things that need to be done right now. And maybe
It is
that's
so
what you're
hard.
dealing with too.
Yeah, it is hard. Personally, for my own stuff, sometimes it's like, can I turn this off to just be present with my kids and have a fun time? And also, when you do work like the work you've done, and some of the work that I do, you're kind of juggling the I want to matter and I want to help and I want to make a difference for other individuals. And when you feel that compulsion, it's hard to say no sometimes, to say like, and this goes back to what we talked about. I think there's a opportunity with the death and mortality, this like, yeah, I can do that. And maybe because we're all going to die eventually, and 100,000 years from now, everything that's happening right now will be forgotten and absorbed in the universe's endless unfolding of infinity, that I can say no sometimes. Because it's like, what is this like, get it done, save everybody's life, rather than like, I'm here now and I can be present and I can offer what you need, and now I can't, and it's okay. I need to not do that. And certainly to keep doing this kind of work, knowing that there's times when we need to turn it off, so that there is ever a time when we can turn it back on and we don't burn out, and we don't get buried.
Exactly, because that's really powerful modeling for our whole society, is modeling that idea of being in balance. And that
Mm,
sometimes, like, you being fully alive, living your best life in all the roles you play, juggling it all, carrying it all somehow, like that's an amazing model for other people to try to follow. You being aware of your mortality and knowing you're going to die, but yet you do your work, and you carry on and you love your life and you play all the roles that you need to play.
I'm trying.
That's amazing.
Yeah, well, yeah. I mean, I appreciate that. It feels just hard and kind of matter of fact from where I'm sitting right now, but I would say maybe I'm getting better at taking naps, and that feels like a huge accomplishment,
Yeah,
to
naps are
like
good.
let myself say, what, you don't need to post something today, or you don't need to make that call. That can wait, till tomorrow. Like, let yourself lay down and let it all go.
Yeah, these
What
are
a
these are
relief.
really good conversations, because so many of us get caught up in this kind of work and we forget completely that we need to take care of ourselves. We don't have energy for this task if we're not filling ourselves up and taking care of us. So
Yeah.
I'm glad you're doing that. I'm glad you're
Thanks.
taking steps to take care of you. That's like one of the most important things you could do.
Yeah, that kind of almost cliche now, the oxygen mask in the airplane, that we need to put it on first before we can help anybody else. And there are times when I feel out of breath. And so I feel very young in this work still. And one of my big learnings is doing a better job at what you're acknowledging me for. So I'm both saying thanks and, geez, I feel like I have a lot to figure out still, you know?
We all do. That's really what this all is. It's just
Sure.
one long learning process of things.
Yeah. And
Well,
hopefully I'll get to like just that old tired stage, 80 years old, still somehow available to support others and having a really deep, I do hope that. I want to keep beginner's mind, but I do hope that I get to a place in my life where I can keep being an offering to others for what it means to be alive and what it means to die,
yeah,
and meaningfully all of it somehow. Anyway, yeah.
a place where somehow effortlessly you'll end up saying the right thing without even having had to think about it.
That sounds
You're in the right
great.
place, and
Like
you'll.
even from my nap, I can just lean up and just say that the wise words effortlessly. Yes, I love that.
Well, I've been wanting to ask you about the prison project that you work on because
Mm-hmm.
I just have this warm place in my heart. I mean, a concern, I guess, for people who are incarcerated and feeling like so much more needs to be done in that community. But I've just been curious about how you got involved in that work and what it consists of.
Thanks for asking. Yeah, it's such a intensely meaningful program, and it's wild to me as another example to go back to what we talked about at the beginning. You're saying a version of, you reminded me of this paying attention for what's needed, what's next. Because really the prison context for me came because of something else we were doing. We're doing an open mic. Someone shows up at that open mic and they feel what people can feel in that space. And this woman came up to me and invited me to come in and talk to the group that I work with now every week, to give a talk, and at San Quentin. And it was called the Brothers Keepers, an in-prison suicide prevention peer support group. And I said, yes, absolutely. Because it's one of those moments, right? Like you would feel if someone came to you and said, from that heart that you just expressed, would you come in and give a talk? You'd say yes, right? And I said yes. And I also had no idea what the hell I was going to go in and say to these guys, It's just that moment of absolutely, that's exactly where I need to go. And what in the heck am I going to offer them? And I think by then with the open mic, my understanding was that the listening is so important. And so what I did at that first visit into San Quentin was I created what would turn into our Live Inside program, which is an open mic in prison for that community, to do what we do at the You're Going to Die Poetry Prose and Everything Goes open mics every month, still in San Francisco and starting in Oakland next month. We offered that space, and it was a place for people to sing songs and say poetry, all the things we talked about earlier. And the program really grew from there. I think it's like creating these experiences where people, including the mental health professionals inside San Quentin, have their own personal experience of like, what is that? What happened there? And I'm not like bragging. I'm saying the space we could create to have people open up so vulnerably and meaningfully and get other people's attention who are in charge and can say, hey, can you come back and do this again? And that's really how the program Alive Inside grew at San Quentin. And then maybe very, very soon after one of those first visits, I met a woman named Jordan Adelheit, who became our program manager. But she came up to me, and she's from Ohio. And she said, I want to work with you. Here's what I've been doing in Ohio for years. Doing TEDx events with community in a prison, Marion Correctional Institution in Ohio. And what I'm trying to share with you is these details of the unfolding, the stuff you don't plan, you don't aggressively seek out and create a Excel spreadsheet of tasks to accomplish. It's those very honest, real, wonderful moments of life where you just meet an opportunity, however it comes to you, and you say yes because you know it's the next thing that you're supposed to do. And there's a through line to your love and compulsion to keep doing this stuff that connects and makes it clear, even if you don't know how it's supposed to go. And so now, just to jump ahead, now I facilitate with that suicide prevention peer support group. It's called the Light Keepers now. Every week I am working on getting a regular schedule of the open mics in San Quentin. We got back after the pandemic to doing those during their mental wellness week and offering concerts and music. These musicians that work with our organization and work in our organization, like I described earlier, they're not just performers, they're people that share their music to offer, like I said, medicine and opening. And so the concerts are kind of the creatively conscious mortality experience. Like we're peppering music throughout an experience where people are sharing honestly, including me, with tears sometimes and laughter, what it means to be alive, what it means to open with each other, what it means to sit in the fire of our emotional experience, like so many of us didn't have growing up from maybe our last generation. Not blaming my mom and my dad, but the reality is I grew up with someone who couldn't really be with my too muchness. So what does it mean to be with community who can? And in creating that experience for so much of the community inside these prisons who didn't get that, and in a system that was set up to have them end up where they are. How are we responsible for that system? A system that's given us the lives we have, your life, Karen, and my life, to have the privilege we have, to have the work and the money and the house we live in, and the family and friends we have. That a system we live in that gave us all that also put them in prison. And that's not to say there were bad decisions made, but odds were stacked against them mostly.
Mm-hmm.
So what does it mean to go in and listen and learn from them? People that have been doing decades of work to create meaning out of so much heartbreak, so much guilt and shame. And so it feels like a responsibility to keep the program going. And the last thing I'll say is, because of the Ohio connection and our return there and our touring in the prisons there, we also started working with the Ohio Innocence Project. So we do a lot of work with the exoneree community, people that were imprisoned who shouldn't have been, and their partners, and holding grief space for them. And in April, we'll go again for our second restorative justice open mic at the Innocence Network Conference in Phoenix. And that's a space where hundreds of exonerees meet and workshop and learn and connect with community and make visible this particularly important, intensely powerful view of how broken the prison industrial complex is. Like, what would put these people away unjustly and keep them there, even when it was sometimes ridiculously obvious that they were innocent, even on paper, or in DNA test or whatever. And so we do work with that community too.
Wow.
And so that's kind of where that one moment, Karen, someone just being like, oh my gosh, what is this open mic? Hey, do you want to come talk to some guys in San Quentin? So wild. I
It's
feel so lucky and
it's that
blessed.
synchronicity and being willing to say yes to it.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. I think it's a lot. I guess I would definitely just take a moment to acknowledge myself for being someone who has a hard time or is inclined to saying yes to stuff that I think it would be understandable to say no.
Yeah.
And I think that's to bring it back to you and I in this conversation and the listener and what it means to be with these parts of existence. It's understandable to say, no, I don't really want to deal with that. And it's so hugely significant then to say, yes, I'm willing to lean in and show up.
Yeah. So true, which you've done in so many ways. And I really appreciate that.
Thank
I'm
you.
I'm
Well, you
wondering,
too. I don't think we'd be talking if you didn't have a version of that in your life.
yeah,
And
it's
I
true.
know from the story, the elements of the story and the hospice work and what you're doing now, saying yes to a conversation with me, asking me to talk with you about this stuff, you're one of those people saying yes,
Mhm.
So
Well,
thanks.
I'm wondering, I'm curious to know, do you think some of the things you're offering, like open mics, is that something someone else, maybe someone listening, could recreate in their own
Mm,
community?
great.
Like
Yeah.
they go out and find a stage somewhere and start inviting people to come to an open mic. That's kind of what I want to use these conversations for, to plant
Mm-hmm.
seeds and
So good.
inspire people. Like, what could you do where you live?
Mm-hmm.
What would work? What does your community need?
So important, right? Yeah, so simple and so egoless a practice of not thinking you're going to die is some end all be all. You know, it is so simple and so good that you brought it up, right? It is, where are you making space to be with others in these hard things? I would say, like, the very minimum version of it that's possible and uncommon for the average human being is being someone who reaches out to others when they're in loss and is not afraid, because it's so hard to have the answers. Just to be very specific, speaking from my experience, when my mother died, the line drawn between people who could say, yes, I'm here, and the people who I thought would do that and couldn't. That's a huge deal, to go to people who are in these crises, trauma, losses, grief of life, and be the kind of person who says, I don't have all the answers, but I'm definitely willing to be here with you. It's just like life-changing to have those kind of people show up. And so that, I'm saying that as the very first option, right? Because you don't have to start a open mic. You don't have to start a nonprofit. You don't have to start a podcast. Like, we should just be people doing more of that in life, and asking questions and checking in and check in again. That you're like, I did that with my friend. I did that with my family member. I'm remembering who I need to call right now that I haven't checked in with in a while. Some dear friend of mine whose mother died. I'm talking about someone specifically. Like, I need to call them again. I need to be the person who keeps saying, like, how you doing now? I know it didn't go away. I know you're living and feeling it every day. I know it's defining your experience of being alive, like, more than everything. And I want to be a place where you can talk about that. Like, we can be that, and we should lean in and just try to be that person in anybody's life who's going through this stuff. And just to kind of connect, one of your questions that you sent me was how the social media presence, kind of how we got to where we are. Well, I want to use this moment to answer that and connect it to this other question. The Death Cafe movement, John Underwood, who is one of the founders of that movement, and he died. What Death Cafe offered was a version of what you're saying. What do we do? Well, just have a death cafe, right? Just make the place where people meet at a coffee shop and talk about these things openly. Such a great example of how easy it is to make room, and that these open mics, death cafes, conversations individually, one-on-one, they're available. We just have to be like, I can't stop thinking about this thing, and trust that your compulsion towards it is enough of a measurement for its value. And I bring out the Death Cafe movement as an example of that, and to acknowledge them for being part of how social media, maybe the earliest version of how we showed up online and connected to community internationally, was because I connected to Death Cafe and John Underwood and people working for the Death Cafe movement who shared the memes I was typing up and my dark humor and all that. And so I just want to take a moment to acknowledge part of how we have the reach we have online is because of the Death Cafe movement. And to bring it back to your question, yes, again, a good example of just have that meeting set up, do a book club that's books around grief and loss. Put out a call for anyone else who's lost a parent on Facebook, and just say, hey, I want to start meeting with y'all. Find the groups out there too. Like, I really believe in the act of grieving alone and doing that lonely healing. And I don't know where I'd be if I hadn't met a bereavement group for the loss of a parent when I was 26 and my mom had just died. It was so huge for me. So there's that too. Like, go and just be a part of things that already exist. Like, you can powerfully be in those contexts that already are occurring. You don't have to create it yourself. Like, just show up in those places, be the listener. Um, Yeah, I love that question. Thank you for asking it.
Yeah. Well, I'm just so inspired by everything that you've done and that you're thank you too for being honest and vulnerable about this journey and how hard
Mm,
it is to be someone who's trying to make a difference and live your own life at the same time, because we have to be honest in those ways as well and kind of share our own suffering as we're going through the process of trying to help other people in their suffering. So, and I
thanks,
thank you
Karen.
for doing that.
Well, thank you for being one of the people I could do that with, because I do mean to highlight that. Not everybody can hold these things. And I just sense your tenderheartedness and kindness and ability to be caring and hold this stuff. And so just to send that acknowledgement right back to you, and to also again remind people, you have to find the places, you have to find the people. Um, it's not a matter of just like dumping this everywhere you go. It's take some conscious, thoughtful, intentional effort to like tend to yourself and know what you need and the things you're going through and the things you need to express and the things you need to learn and in your own unique individual life. So thanks for letting me do that with you.
Oh, you're welcome. Well, and it does sound like one thing we're saying, I don't know if this is true, but that there are more people out there than we may realize who also want to share and who would be willing to listen. And but we have to look for each other to
I
in order
100% agree
to
with that.
connect.
Yeah, just create the opportunity if you can, or like I said, be the one to go out there and start meeting those people. And it can happen at a party. It can happen at a kid's pickup with a bunch of parents. I think there's a way of paying attention to community where you can really know, probably a good chance everybody's going through something,
Something.
but just really paying attention to someone else's, I don't know, emotional inner landscape. It's far more visible than maybe we think sometimes.
Yeah,
And knowing one little question can just crack people open, and they've just been waiting for someone to ask them.
so true. Well, Ned, thank you again for talking with me today, and thanks for creating You're Going to Die, because I really I just really enjoy it. And
Thanks,
I don't know,
Karen.
it feels good to be connected to you on Instagram, and I always
Yeah.
look forward to seeing whatever posts you put there. They're usually so unique and so different than the average postings that people in this space make. So I
Mm,
enjoy that a
I
lot.
appreciate that. Yeah. I means a lot, because I hope to be a sort of unique invitation to a certain unique individual, and know that there's just so many different access points to being in this conversation. It's just an honor to be any one of those. Thanks.
Yeah. For sure. Well, I wish you ongoing health and balance
Thank you.
and
You too.
joy as you go through this work. And so have a good therapy session today.
I'm going to. Thanks for kind of getting me started even a little bit. I started some therapy with you.
I did the pre-therapy warm
Yeah,
up, so
great. What do I owe you?
it's all right.
Thanks, Karen.
All right. Well, really fun. Hopefully we can stay in touch and we'll
We
connect
will.
again.
Yeah, I'd like that.
All right. I hope you enjoyed my conversation with Ned Buskirk of You're Going to Die. And you can learn more by going to the website yg2d.com. And I encourage you to check it out and find out all the great things that they're doing. So until the next time when I'm back with another interview or maybe a tutorial, who knows? Take care and be well. Bye bye.